This is BS on Broadcasting. David Brody, a former national radio host and talent coach with 4 decades in the industry.
You gotta understand what the score is and where you are in the game.
And Marc Serber, a commentator who's called and hosted soccer matches for leagues and competitions around the world.
Real panic defending from DC United and continues here. And the beat is finally beaten. It's the opening goal for Chivas USA.
Together, they're on a mission to help every broadcaster be their best by learning from the best. And always talking BS. Brody, Serber on Broadcasting.
Welcome to BS on Broadcasting. I'm your host, Marc Serber, alongside talent coach David Brody and Shawn Medow, broadcaster based in Los Angeles. And of course, our mission here is to help all sports broadcasters be their best by learning from the best. And we certainly have one of the very best color commentators here this afternoon in Kyndra de St, Aubin, who is the color analyst on TV for Minnesota United and has also been an analyst for the last 2 FIFA Women's World Cups at Fox. And Kyndra, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. And if you could just take us through your journey, how you rose up through the ranks and then got to Fox and then ended up as the television analyst for Minnesota United.
Sure. Well, thank you guys, first of all, for having me. I appreciate it. And I love that you guys are doing this because I think it's always important for broadcasters, and not even necessarily broadcasters, just people that want to get in the industry and they're not sure what they want to do or where they want to land. Maybe they think they want to be broadcasters and they end up doing something else or vice versa. So I think it's pretty awesome to be able to kind of give them a clear cut view on what the business looks like and what it entails to get there. So for me, my journey was maybe a little bit different than a lot of television broadcasters because I didn't go into it wanting to be a television broadcaster or a soccer television broadcaster. I sort of fell into it. My goal when I graduated college was to be in sports. I love all sports. So I got married right out of college. I graduated in May, got married in July, and I didn't have a job lined up or anything like that. So I was pounding the pavement in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time is where we started, and just wanted to get a job in any way, shape, or form, so I'm knocking on doors, and whether it's television stations, radio stations, newspapers, just trying to get into sports in any way I could. And I'm old. So this was like, I didn't have like a home computer. So I'm going to the library, researching things, and I didn't have a cell phone. So this was all like, I had to go to the library and look up books on, football, like offensive line. I mean, I know football, but I didn't know guard, tackle, like, halfback, fullback, like line formations and eye formations and all this stuff. So I was just kind of hitting the pavement, trying to find how I could get into sports. And I ended up at a sports radio station there working part-time. And it was an ESPN affiliate, but they carried very little ESPN. So this was like double wide trailer in the parking lot of a Walmart with carpet on the walls and a bee infestation. Like this guy had come in and bought this radio station that was tucked in the back where nobody knew about it. And he said, you know what, you play soccer. Why don't you be the Milwaukee Wave beat reporter? And I said, sure. So I went in with like old school tape reporter and part-time would go cover the Milwaukee Wave, watch the games, and then do the interviews after the games, and then go back to that double wide trailer at 11 o'clock at night, which probably wasn't the safest thing, and cut the tape and get it ready for SportsCenter updates on that ESPN radio affiliate the next day. So that was like my first broadcasting experience, was just covering the Wave. And then slowly but surely, I worked my way into being the beat reporter for the Milwaukee Bucks and the Milwaukee Brewers. And I would do like Badgers and Marquette Golden Eagles, and I would do Packers and stuff as well whenever we needed help. So I covered all sports at the time, but all for radio as a reporter. And then I would do some SportsCenter updates on the air again for radio. And then I did advertising sales during the day too. So it was long days, and it was learning every aspect of the business. And baseball is my least favorite sport. Incredibly boring in my mind, but I learned to respect it and appreciate it. And I covered every home game. He's like, you're going to be the Brewers beat reporter. You got to go to 81 home games. And I was like, oh man, this will be fun. So that's how I got into sports. And I kept doing radio. We moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, and did the same thing there, covered all the teams there. And then all of a sudden, I got asked one day to do a ASU women's soccer game for Fox Sports Arizona. And it was just somebody that I knew from Fox Sports Arizona, that I knew from covering all the other sports and mixing and mingling with people, as we all know you do in the business, and said, hey, you want to come and do this ASU game with me? And I'm like, sure. I'd never called a game, never done television, never been an analyst before, nothing. And so I was like really working from scratch and never even talked to anybody about how do you make a board? What does your board look like? How do you analyze a game? What do you want to talk about? And did this game. And then after I did that game, he said, there's this guy I know at the Big Ten Network. They're just starting it, the Big Ten Network at that time. And they need a women's soccer analyst. And you played soccer in the Big Ten, so maybe you should give him a shout. So at that time, I reached out to him, and they were flying me up from Phoenix to the Big Ten at that time to call women's soccer games live, which was like crazy nowadays because it's an Olympic sport. It's a non-revenue producing sport, and you're flying someone in. I'm going to Iowa, calling a game from like a card table on the sideline, field level with a tent over your head, to do a women's soccer game. And oddly enough, one of the first games I called there was with Lisa Byington, who's now doing play-by-play for the Milwaukee Bucks on television. It was pretty awesome. So it was just like this journey of, and I kept doing my radio job at the same time when I was doing the Big Ten games, because clearly that's seasonal. And it was just very much like, hey, every time you get an opportunity, knock it out of the park, do your best, be prepared, and hopefully you'll get more opportunities. So then it came where then the Pac-12 network came about, and I started doing Pac-12, which was much more feasible from a regional standpoint to fly and do games. And then all of a sudden I got, a call saying, hey, somebody can't make the WPS game. Do you want to do a WPS game for Fox? And we'll fly you to Boston. And I was like, sure, that'd be great. I called it with Alan Hopkins. And, then after that, it was like, hey, now we're missing someone for the WUSA games, or, now there's NWSL. And it was just kind of like this thing that, every time there was an opportunity, it just slowly kind of built. And so that's how I sort of got on the Fox radar. And then when the 2015 World Cup was coming up, they started bringing us in to do a trial. We would do U20s, the Algarve Cup, as I did with Mark. We would do different things from studio off monitor, and they would try different partnerships to see what worked, what didn't. And then that's kind of how, in a real short summary, that's sort of how it came to be. And it's just honestly, one of those things where it's like, I can't preach enough to people. It's just about taking your opportunities and absolutely crushing them when you have the chance. And that's all you can do, is be prepared. And then we all know different chemistry, different people. And Jen Hildreth and I ended up getting partnered up together, and we worked together in the 2015 World Cup, which was incredible experience. I'd never been a part of anything like that. Just that kind of production. We were based in Vancouver. Being there, being a part of it, it was a little bit intimidating. We were the only all-female broadcast team, Jen and I, that was at the World Cup, and also the only ones that were kind of newbies. I have 0 caps on my resume. I have 0 national team experience, and here I was as an analyst calling these Women's World Cups games. So it's a little intimidating. You're with Allie Wagner and Danielle Slayton, and all the names you can think of, Leslie Osborne, that were part of that crew calling games. And Jen and I just, we just kind of went in there and laid it all out there and came prepared and did what we did. And all of a sudden, then I moved to California after that, Northern California. My husband got a job in Northern California. Ben Grossman, who you may know with Fox, is one of the sort of the talent coordinators or media consultants for them. And I saw him in Vancouver, and he had a Minnesota Twins hat on. And I was like, that's weird. There's someone here in Vancouver that's a Minnesota person. That's where I'm from. And got talking to him, and he lives in Northern California. So I met him at the World Cup in Vancouver. And then when we were in Northern California living there, he said, hey, do you want to have coffee? And I said, sure, that'd be great. I'll bring, I got to bring my daughter with me. She was like 16 months at the time, but meet you for coffee. And he sat down and he said, you know what? I think that you would be awesome at this job. And there's a new team coming to Minnesota. They're going to be MLS. And I want you to go and interview for that job. And I was like, that's great. And I'm thinking sideline reporter. And he's like, no, I want you to be the analyst of Minnesota United. I think you would be awesome. You would knock it out of the from Minnesota, growing up in Minnesota, growing up with the Minnesota Thunder and the history that is here. They really wanted someone that could move here, be here, and knew the soccer culture here in Minnesota and kind of grew up with it and could appreciate it and understand it. And want to be a part of it. And my husband grew up with it as well. I mean, he was drafted by the Thunder. So it was like an easy fit, to come back. All our family is here. So anyway, I came here, went through the gauntlet of interviews and did all the stuff and the rigmarole, and got called back and had another interview. And then before I knew it, we were moving back to Minnesota, and here it was doing Minnesota United as a female broadcaster in MLS. And it's been awesome ever since. And then I did the 2019 World Cup as well. So that's kind of how it all happened. But it really just comes down to, taking advantage of your opportunities and trying to just be prepared. I can't emphasize that enough. You go into a game not knowing if you haven't done your research, you're in trouble, and you'll be found out real quick, especially on live television.
Yeah. And, that's such a big thing, because I feel like it seems so obvious, right? But it's a life lesson too, is like, don't wait for an opportunity to come and then, try and learn everything and do it. Like, do your best to be prepared all the time, because you never know when that opportunity is going to come. And so it's kind of that, like, luck is when hard work and preparation meets opportunity. And it sounds, like you really took that. And, this brings up just like so many questions, but I guess the one that I'll go with is, throughout your journey, especially going from never having done, TV, let alone color commentary, what was your evolution in terms of your color commentating, and what were kind of like the big lessons you learned along the way? And even now, like, what are you trying to refine in your own style? In terms of color commentary and in terms of being an analyst?
Well, I think first and foremost, I went into it, and maybe it was good that I was so naive on like how to do it. I had watched a lot of sports, clearly having covered them for a really long time, with my journey with radio. So I had listened to plenty of commentary for every single sport. But I hadn't listened to a lot of soccer, because if you think about it, when did soccer really start being strongly televised and easily accessible on television? It wasn't that long ago. I mean, that was maybe 2000. I'm trying to think of when the Big Ten Network started, maybe like 2010 or somewhere around there. So I think that when I went into it and I did that first ASU game, I don't remember being super nervous, but I do remember calling the game like I sit on the couch and watch a game with my husband. Like that's, he played soccer. That's what we do. We watch sports, we watch soccer, like we'd watch World Cups at other times. So I really tried to just envision it that way. Like how, when I'm watching a game and we're commentating on it and we're talking about what we see and what we don't see, and try not to talk too much, which we all know is a very big key as an analyst, is trying not to be talking all the time, especially in soccer. It's a sport that we all know, you can let it breathe quite a bit. So I think that was my main goal, is simple is better. Simple is better. Don't try to do too much, and speak what you know. And that's honestly like how I went into it. That is how I went into these games, was, just try not to do too much. And I just remember as a player, I was a central midfielder most of my career growing up, and then I transitioned into a center back. And I always kind of felt like maybe I would be a coach someday, just the way I like to see the game or analyze the game. And that obviously that didn't come to fruition. But I think that that's even how I like to call it, was just, seeing from a broad perspective. And it's a little bit different because when you aren't covering a team all the time, like you're just popping in and doing a college game here or there, you don't know every player's tendencies. You don't know every, what's been going on at training, what's been happening here and there. You just try to research as much as you can, talk to the coaches, talk to the staff, talk to the players, and find out the information to do the best you can, but you're not immersed in it every day. So be simple and, just call it like I was sitting on the couch. And it sounds really cheesy, but that's how I kind of felt about it, especially early on. And then it was more just refining like my boards, refining my research, especially when you start to get tight on time. All of a sudden when you're doing 2 or 3 games, 4 games in a week, and you're trying to get, in depth on everybody, trying to really pick out the points that are going to be pertinent to you in a broadcast and make you separate yourself from others. That was usually what I tried to focus on as my career has gone along, knowing what my strengths and weaknesses are and trying to figure out, the best places to focus.
Kyndra, I have a
Sean?
question for you. It's ironic that you're with us tonight. I was doing a coaching session earlier today with a young woman in Boston, 23 years old, just starting out learning the business. She doesn't have a job yet, but she came to me and said, I want you to train me. So I've been working with her for a few months. And at the end of the session today, she said, I've got a number of questions, but you can't answer them. And I said, all right, then don't ask. And she said, the reason why you can't answer these questions is because you're a guy. She said, I want to talk to a female sportscaster, and I want to know the obstacles that I'm going to face as I travel through the journey of sports broadcasting as a woman. So let me ask you that question. The obstacles that she will face are?
Well, first and foremost, I have to give an insane amount of credit to all the women that have come before us, because they are honestly, the women that have paved the way, and not just to be a color analyst now for a men's soccer team, but I'm talking even going into locker rooms. You think back in the day and the stories you hear, and I've worked in some pretty awesome markets with some incredible women that are writers, television reporters, whatever they might be, that have kind of had to go there and do that before me. And I guess I won't view them as obstacles, in the sense that when I was a reporter and I was 23, when I got my first job, and you're going in locker rooms and you're going in clubhouses, you're going in dugouts, and it can be an intimidating factor. And I just did a podcast for National Girls and Women's in Sports Day with our new CEO, who's a woman, and then also with the head coach of the Minnesota Gophers, who's a woman. And we talked about this, and it's so much about, and it's, again, it might sound cheesy, but holding your head high, being confident that you know what you know. I could go and sit in the Brewers dugout next to Bob Uecker and listen and take in all the information and the stories and learn, not go in like you know too much and you know everything, but at the same time being confident, knowing your stuff, because there's always going to be some of those people that are thinking, oh man, who's she? They just threw her in here because maybe she's more likely to get the interview, than some old guy that's been a reporter and a beat writer for 40 years. So I think you got to know your stuff. You got to be respectful of whatever game it is that you're covering. Come prepared, ask good questions, which is the same for any journalist, right? And any reporter and any broadcaster, but there might be just a slightly higher bar when you're a female first going in and asking those questions and learning that game, learning that sport, learning that team, whoever it is that she might be covering, especially in the Boston market. I can imagine if she gets a job there, how intense that can be with those sports teams and those sports fans. I mean, ask Kate Scott. She's now the play-by-play for the Philadelphia 76ers. I worked with her at Pac-12, and she's saying, you criticize me as much as you want for how I call the game, but don't criticize me because I am a woman, which is what we do with all play-by-play and analysts, right? I mean, nobody likes everybody how they call a game. It's just not possible. So there's things that I do that people aren't going to like. But I think that ultimately, you know your stuff, you come prepared, you show up. I went to every batting practice, every shoot around. You know what I mean? I didn't miss a thing. I was at everything, learning, soaking it all in, listening, and then asking good questions and making sure that I knew, what was going on. And that's ultimately all you can do as any reporter. And you just have to notch it up just a tad, because when you're a female in a male dominated industry, and we could say the same for corporate America, right? Or any of construction. I have two cousin-in-laws that, are high up in the construction industry, and you talk about things that they face. It's a different world sometimes when you walk in there, but as long as you are confident, you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about, and you show up prepared, I think that's all you can do as a reporter. And then for a female, it just gets notched up just a tiny little bit. That's all I could tell her.
So do you believe today that women still have to be better prepared than men?
Well, I mean, I would like to say no, that's not the case, but I would say ultimately, I think that they will be slightly more criticized if they get something wrong. You know what I mean? You could put two people out there, a man and a woman, and if a woman says something wrong and a man says the same thing, they might just not get as much heat. Social media, thank God, was like just starting when I was starting my career all those eternities ago, it feels like. But I would say that it's not that you have to be better prepared. It's just that you're more likely going to be criticized a little more, even if you said the exact same thing, if that makes any sense. I did a Packer pregame show on television for Fox 9 when I was, back in Milwaukee. And I remember it's one of those games, game 3, nobody plays. It's like 4-string guys, but I came prepared, but I said Deke instead of Juke. And I got a handwritten letter, 3 pages long from a male viewer that sent it to the radio station to tell me that I said the wrong thing. So, and I don't know if he would have sent that to, the male guy that was on television, maybe, but, I just think you're going to be more likely to be criticized, I think, if you're covering male sports and there's people out there watching.
I wanted to ask just a question about kind of the logistics for when you're in a game. You're obviously doing analysis, so it's a little different than, say, a play-by-play person. But when you go into a game as a color, an analyst, like, what are you looking for? What are your notes during that game that are different than the play-by-play person, obviously? So, like, how are you constructing that game onto, say, a notepad, or how do you go about that?
Well, I would say a play-by-play person might be a little bit more like factual information, and you guys can tell me this if you're more experienced in that side of the television broadcast, but more a little bit factual information and statistical, maybe, let's say. But I would say I sort of live and die and I live and breathe, I should say, by the things that I find during the week from an analysis perspective, watching other games. And especially like Minnesota United, I mean, I know them for the first part. If there's something specific that Adrian, the head coach of Minnesota United, has been working on that week, has been talking to the guys about, that's why I go to practice. That's why I go to training. People are like, you go to practice every day? I mean, if I'm allowed to go to practice every day, I will go to practice every day, because you just don't know what you'll pick up there. Maybe there's a fight. Maybe somebody gets hurt. Maybe Adrian's yelling something at a certain guy. Maybe he's trying a new system. Maybe somebody's playing in a new spot. Like, you just don't know. So all those things I'm trying to pick up as an analyst on what they're trying to work on from a tendency perspective. The opposition, I'm watching their last game. I mean, more games if I have time. Luckily, when it's a Western Conference game, you watch a lot of the league anyways, and you guys may find this too. When it's something that you're already sort of following, you're sort of immersed in a team's tendencies, a player's tendencies, a coach's style. So those are all things I'm trying to pick up on. And I learn a lot by listening to interviews, because I can't be at, I try to get on every media availability that I can. So I find out, if we're playing Philadelphia Union in the opener, I want to get on Jim Curtin's media availability that week, because even if I'm not asking any questions, because sometimes, and we always have them on our podcast, we have an opposition coach we try on every one of our Minnesota United podcasts. And I think sometimes teams find that funny that we're asking, that I want to get on their media availability. It's like, don't worry, there's no trade secrets we're stealing here. This is media availability. But that's where I get a lot of information, is from those availabilities. How do they answer the questions? What are they working on? What are they looking for this season? What are they looking in the last game and the next game? And we've been really lucky and fortunate to have some really good interviews. And I've done the same thing in college. The number one thing for me when I would do Pac-12 and Big Ten was getting conference calls with the coaches. And we would go down the players, strengths and weaknesses. What do you see from this player? What do you expect from this player? What do you look for from this player? Who's your unsung hero? Who's your this? Who's your that? Because a lot of it, when it's not the team you're covering every day, you try to get as much information as possible, and you can only do that by asking. And odds are you ask and you'll get the interview. But information, aside from just watching tape on teams. But we all don't have, 90 minutes for every game to sit down and watch it from front to back, but you try as much as possible to sit down and really analyze what is happening in a game, and what's working, what's not working, what are the sort of the tendencies of the team, how do they like to play. I mean, I hear Jordan Angeli, who's another great analyst, Columbus Crew, she'll talk about up, back, and through, like Columbus Crew, how they like to play. So trying to pick up on those types of things is what I look for as an analyst in a game.
So how different is that preparation for a game on Fox during the Women's World Cup versus Minnesota United? And how different does that make your analysis?
Well, I'll tell you right now, it makes the preparation a lot different, because some of these countries, the teams that show now, France, Spain, USA, Canada, go down the list of some of those countries that have a deeper, England, a history of soccer and a soccer culture. Brazil, that are supporting their women's teams, it's a little bit easier, but you're watching tape. Thank goodness for research teams. I'll tell you, and Mark can attest to this, the Fox research team has so much information. And if we didn't have them, it would be very difficult, because you come to some of the, I've been following on Twitter, Bayana, the South African women's national team they're gearing up. You have CONCACAF W coming up, and you've got AFCON, got all this stuff that are already gearing up for the Women's World Cup in 2023. And you're trying to follow what they're doing. You're trying to get information. So a lot of what I spend my time doing with countries like that and teams like that, where it's hard to get tape, it's hard to get footage, it's hard to even get bios on these players unless they are playing somewhere else. If they're playing somewhere else, which, fortunately, women's soccer, football in other countries is growing from a professional level. It gives these ladies the opportunity to go other places, but we focus a lot on stories when it comes to a World Cup, because you love to see these people succeed. You love to see these women succeed and thrive. So in the game, you're going to try to absorb as much information as possible, get together with your play-by-play person, which happened to be Jen Hildreth for both the last two. You get together with your producer, you knock out what are the storylines for this game? What are we focusing on? Who are we focusing on? And also just anybody who has covered that team prior, or maybe they have a star player that's been playing in Europe or something. You try to get as much information as possible, and you lean on that. And Haiti, the same thing. A lot of the coaches for some of these countries are American coaches. Look at Randy Waldrum. You try to reach out to him and find out what information you can find on any of these players that he might know of or have been playing in the U.S. In their respective countries or colleges, and then going and playing for their countries. That's really all you can do. But I absolutely love it. I can't speak highly of it enough, of those experiences, because it is a really cool combo of, it's soccer. This is a big tournament, the biggest in the world, but you're also trying to tell these amazing stories of these human beings that in oftentimes their country doesn't necessarily want them playing soccer, and they're there and they're killing it. They're crushing it, so that's kind of fun too.
Yeah. You talk about the fact that you watch these games, you go to all the media sessions, you'll run down the roster with two different coaches. And if it's college, they can have, 25 players on a team that could all play in a game. So you're talking about footage, you're talking about research teams, and you're talking about information on 50 different players. And yet, one of the things you said at the first part of this was that as an analyst, you have to be very short and succinct with your analysis, with your storytelling. Especially don't want to step on, if there's a long ball all of a sudden and there's a breakaway, you don't want to step on that call. So something that's so important is you get all this information, but then you have to edit it. Then you have to know what's most important. How do you go about disseminating that?
First of all, are you wearing a puffy jacket in Los Angeles?
It is a super light jacket.
I just noticed that.
Puffy and comfortable, but just actually, I'm here with Shawn in LA.
Oh, okay.
And it's awesome, and it's so nice out. But this is a super light jacket. It just looks puffy.
Sure. Okay.
And yes, I am a wuss.
Yeah. That's actually a great point, though, Mark. When we talk about there is such a thing as information overload, and we've probably all been there. You want to be prepared, but how many times, I can't tell you, I've been sitting at, my table or whatever, standing up, calling a game that's out in front of me, and you're trying not to rifle through papers, because you have so much information and you have this great nugget on so-and-so. And first and foremost, don't ever feel like you have to get something in. And I think that's really important as a play-by-play or as an analyst. And I don't want to speak for play-by-play because I've never done it, but you may have a gazillion nuggets and you might get to 10% of it in a game, because once the game and that whistle blows, it's the game that dictates what you're going to talk about. So if there's something insanely pertinent and then something happens in the game and you're like, yes, hallelujah, I found this nugget and now I get to implement into the game. Great. But don't ever have this like checklist of like, oh, I found all these great things. I spent all this time. Now I got to get this, and this in there. So it is about being simple and just calling what you see and just feeding off the game and the energy of the game. We've also probably all called games that are completely blowouts or boring or whatever it might be. And then that calls for a different kind of energy. It calls for a different kind of information. And it's different calling college games than it is professional games, than it is calling World Cup games, because, you know, your level of insight and or criticism of young ladies that are 18 and freshmen in college might be slightly different than, you know, a professional team that you might be calling in the standard or U.S. women's national team game, whatever it might be, you know, a little bit different of your level of criticism. But I think that it's important to know that you don't have to get everything in. The game is going to dictate the way you call the game and the information that you give, and be short and sweet in your analysis. Way easier said than done. There are absolutely times where I've rambled on, absolutely times where I've made up words in a broadcast. Happens. You know, you just, and you got to be able to laugh at yourself. You have to be able to just not take yourself too seriously, because you record an open, or say you're doing a live open. Recording opens is sometimes worse than live, I think, because you feel like there's pressure, you know, there's no pressure, you screw up more. But you just got to roll with it, and you just got to keep going. And I've laughed at myself plenty of times. I've had great broadcast partners along the way and every step of my journey, which is helpful. And none of us take ourselves too seriously, which is good. So there's a professionalism, but there's also a not take yourself too seriously, kind of a fine line in there. You want to enjoy the game, and it's about having the right amount of information. And I think only the amount of games that you do, the amount of broadcasts you do, you'll get there. You know, you may not know the first game you ever do. You may have too much information because you're worried that you won't have enough. You know, I have kind of go-to stats that I write down for every player, and I handwrite everything. I don't type out labels. I don't print stuff. I literally handwrite everything. Like, I was listening to a Robin Fraser interview from, I don't know, it must have been preseason sometime just now. And he's saying things, and I'm handwriting everything he's saying. I mean, I don't have to do that. He's saying it. It's taped, it's recorded, but it helps me get it in my brain. And then I remember it, and then it's fresh. And then I'm not having to go to my notes so much. It's just, I know that I already heard that, and I saw that, and I know that was what they were trying to do. So when it happens in a game, it's already top of mind, and I can just, it's conversational, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And our first two of these, the three podcasts we've done so far before this, were with play-by-play guys. And we spoke with them about how to build a rapport with your color commentator. Now, as a color commentator, how do you work to build a rapport with those you work with who are doing the play-by-play?
Well, I think that's a tricky one too, because having done college and professional and like different, I've worked with, so there's some college, you know, seasons where I work with a different broadcaster every game. Mm-hmm. So it is I think you have to be very flexible. You have to be fluid. You have to be understanding. It's not like you're studying the play-by-play. I don't go and I don't watch other games they've done to learn their style. I think I'm relatively easygoing when it comes to broadcast. So I'm not necessarily married to something. Like, if all of a sudden, you know, you get stepped on, or you're just trying to feel each other out, I think, for the beginning of a broadcast. And sometimes you have time to do that, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a pregame show, sometimes you don't. So I think you have to be flexible. You have to be willing to sort of be agile in the broadcast, learn each other's style in the first 5, 10, 15 minutes if you've never worked together before. And then slowly but surely, even in a game, it'll come, you know. And honestly, that's the only advice I can give. And I've literally worked with a different broadcast. Sometimes I've worked with people calling a soccer game that have never worked a soccer game before. And they openly will say that to me. Hey, I don't know soccer. I'm going to come to you with questions, you know, in a game. And that's fine too, but they're learning how to call a soccer game, just like I'm learning how to work with them. So it's got to be a very agile, flexible situation for the broadcasters on both sides, and understanding that you may have different styles, but you got to make this thing sound good. Ultimately, that's the goal.
I'm going to have to zig or zag, because Serber just stole my question.
Speaking of being flexible.
Exactly. But I'll follow up on that. When I was doing Princeton basketball, I had a couple of analysts working with me, and these two guys hated each other. And it made for some very difficult moments to listen to during the broadcast. And I would have to say, boys, boys, boys. And I think a lot of people thought it was an act. No, they hated each other. But you said something a little while ago, and I wrote what you said down. Don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that's a really important lesson, especially someone like you who works with a lot of different play-by-play people, right? I mean, over the course of your career, you've had a ton of play-by-play guys that you've worked with, and women now. And I think, again, not taking yourself too seriously, God, that's just great advice.
I literally tell everybody that. And I've spoken to some college classes, and sometimes people are in there and they're broadcasters, and sometimes they're not. Who knows? They might just be taking the course because they needed to fill 2 credits. It might have, but maybe it'll change their journey and what they decide what they want to do. But honestly, I think it's true really in any aspect of life and any career. And again, it sounds really cheesy, but like, you have to be able to laugh at yourself. You have to be able to slough things off, because how many times have we all screwed up in a live broadcast? And yes, you may get criticism, and somebody, I'll get a text message, I'll get a note. I had somebody call me after one of the games I did last year. I'm out picking pumpkins with my daughter and my parents, and I get this call just blasting me, from someone that I respect in the industry, but rightfully so in that criticism. And you have to figure out how to take it in and make it better. But at the same time, don't dwell on it, because in the next broadcast, it's going to haunt you. So in the moment I didn't even know I screwed up in the moment. So I didn't stress it in the moment, but in the moment you have to be able to, like I said, I make up words all the time. You may screw up a line, and it's okay to correct yourself too. Don't act like, if you notice you called the wrong player, or you called the wrong thing, or I think one time I thought it was a penalty, but it wasn't. It was a dead ball right outside the box. Like, if you pick that up and you correct yourself, I think people appreciate that more than acting like it just never happened. So you have to be able to just have fun with it. And if you're too tense and you're too stressed and you want to be perfect, it won't be fun. And you'll probably end up being worse, because you're walking on your own eggshells, not somebody else's. You're walking on your own in a broadcast.
And you have to realize no one has ever done a perfect broadcast.
Yes, exactly. Never happened. Never happened. I don't care. The greats in the world, in every sport, there's never been a person that's done we've just been, reminiscing about John Madden, right? After he passed away, talk about a broadcast, like a broadcaster where you're just like, this guy made up words like it was going out of style, and he made money off of it. He just enjoyed himself and he had a good time. So I think he's one of those people that seem to not take himself too seriously as a broadcaster.
Well, This might not be the best transition from not taking yourself too seriously. Well, first of all.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Yes. So first of all, I'm going to be completely transparent. I, suffer from bad anxiety, and, like broadcasting was something I wanted so bad that like my throat would literally close up like every time before I went on air. And I worked through it the best that I could. I sometimes wonder, could I have done even more if it weren't for that anxiety? But, you talked about being nervous before the World Cup, and for any broadcaster, especially in soccer, that is the pinnacle. That is exactly what you're trying to reach. And so you get there and you get to that moment. How did you handle any nerves or anxiety to be able to go on and not take yourself too seriously and enjoy the moment, despite knowing, the just, how big of the situation and the occasion that it was?
Well, there's a couple things there that you have to, and again, all these things easier said than done. I can sit here and talk about, walk with your head held high, be confident. And I've had plenty of moments where you're like, man, do I belong here? Should I be here? You kind of question yourself. Maybe something happens. Like, there are definitely those moments. And first and foremost, it's having the support system around you to constantly, and there's times where they have to remind you, like, you are here for a reason. You were chosen for this for a reason. And my husband has been my number one in that regard. Secondly, it's your broadcast partner. I had a broadcast partner at the World Cups in Jen Hildreth, who was always, we were kind of in the same boat. She had never done this before. She wasn't an LA Fox, person, hadn't been in their lineup for years or anything like that. And we kind of fell into each other's lap. And then we had an awesome producer in Carlos Di Molino, who just was amazing. And I think that easier said than done, and always telling you to be confident and to hold your head, high and know that you deserve it. I remember going into the first meeting in Vancouver, and it's all the Fox staff that's there for the World Cup, whether it's producers, makeup, researchers, everybody. And I'm thinking they're going to go through all the broadcast partners, teams on this big giant screen. And I'm thinking to myself, how are they going to font me? That was my thought. I have no caps. I have no gold medals. I have no World Cups. I have no nothing. And every other analyst, how many ever World Cups with the women's national team, how many other caps, how many, how many appearances in this and that and the other. And that was my first thought. I'm thinking, oh my God, what is he going to put under my name? But I got over that really quickly when you find out that everybody's in the same boat. And once that whistle blows, once that camera goes on, once that light turns on, whatever it might be, you're all calling the same game. And it's really about how you prepared for it. And it's really about how you carry yourself in the sense that you have to find a way to act like you belong there. Know that you belong there in that moment. And that's the only way you're going to get through it. But once that whistle blows, and how many times have we seen Hall of Famers on a studio desk absolutely kill it on the field when they played, but maybe they're not so great at calling a game. Maybe they're not so great at a studio desk job. So it's not that one thing translates to the other. It's really about just how you prepare for the game, how you show up, and having a tremendous support system. Because if you don't have that and you don't have good advice from people, it is really hard to get over those tough moments. And I had some challenges even when I came to Minnesota United. I'm thinking, oh man, this is awesome. I belong here. I deserve this job. But then there's some times where you might feel like that's not the case. Maybe you feel like you're getting manipulated a little bit, or you're getting knocked down a little bit. And it really takes a lot to get yourself back up there and say, I belong here. This is my position to have. And I was asked here for a reason, and that's all you can do.
Well, we're very cognizant of the fact that you are talking about preparation, that we're less than 25 minutes away from you wanting to go watch a Minnesota United game in order to prepare for the season. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to end the same way we end every podcast, and that's by asking you two questions. And the first question is, knowing what you know now, what would you go back and tell the Kyndra who is just starting out in this business?
Wow. Gosh, that is a good one. Of all these things I've done, I don't think I've ever been asked that question. I would say, I'd probably say, oh man, I'd probably have to be something about, gosh, that's a really good one. It's a tough one for me because I can't remember necessarily a specific moment where I was so down, that hey, there's always tomorrow, there's always another day, there's always another opportunity or something like that. But I would honestly say that, every step of the journey, this is what I would tell the Kyndra now from what I know, every step of the journey is well worth it. And there's moments, and I think back to even prior to broadcasting, but when I was doing radio, and you're working those 100-hour weeks and those long baseball seasons or whatever, and then getting up and doing sales and whatnot. And I, even prior to that, when I was working part-time for the radio station, I was working at a podiatry office. So I think I would honestly just say every step of the way is worth it. Every little bump and hiccup and up and down. And then, the other thing I would say, don't say no. Don't say no. When you are in the beginning of this business and you're trying to scrap and claw your way and get opportunities. I had someone call me all of a sudden, the Big Ten producer, and he was like, we might need you to do women's gymnastics. And I was like, sure. I have no clue how to do women's gymnastics, but I was going to figure it out in 2 days if I needed to. So that would probably be my biggest piece of advice. If I was the Kyndra now, I would tell the Kyndra then is do not say no, and you'll learn something from that too. If you get thrown into a sport that you've never done before.
I think that's such great advice because one of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started out was, oh, I'm a soccer guy. I want to do soccer. I'm going to Syracuse where every other kid wants to do football, baseball, basketball. If I stay in my lane and do soccer, I'll get those opportunities. And, I waited till like 2 years of my career to do other things. And that's when I realized that not only did it make me a better soccer broadcaster, but it wasn't just soccer that I loved. It was the art of broadcasting. And so for me, like that was so eye-opening. It's like, you know what? Now I want to do everything because I just love being behind the mic. And so getting to have all those different experiences. And it's like, if I'd done that beforehand, I would have been even a better soccer broadcaster going in. So I think that's amazing advice.
It's kind of like being a multi-sport athlete, I mean, it's the dying breed out there. Everyone wants you to specialize when you're 4 years old, but it's kind of the same thing. If you're doing multiple things, I think you're going to find more success down the road, and you never know what you're going to end up in.
Yeah, absolutely. Just never know when you might be calling gymnastics.
Exactly. Not the easiest.
Yeah.
Shawn, luckily they found somebody.
Yeah. You just got to call somebody and say, hey, I'm doing this. What are you going to do? Shawn and I can attest to that. All of a sudden this year, we found ourselves doing aerials at 3 a.m. from Finland.
There you go.
You just never know, but you got to embrace it. So yeah, the last question is, what is something that you think that young broadcasters should know that they're maybe not being told, but you feel like, hey, you're starting out, I don't want you to make this mistake. What is something that you feel that young broadcasters aren't being told, either about the business or how to navigate it, or just about the art of play-by-play or color commentary? What is something young broadcasters should know that they don't at the moment?
Well, I would say it would be, don't rely on others, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but like how many times you work with someone and it's within your control, right? I mean, there's some things you have to rely on others for, but if it's scheduling an interview with a coach, if it's trying to get a conference call, if it's trying to schedule a guest, if it's trying to get game notes, if it's trying to, whatever it might be, just go on the website, find the SID, find the PR person, like just do it yourself. If you have contacts and you can get a hold of a coach or somebody yourself, like don't rely on others to get information, because you know how important it is to you. They might have 100 things going on. They might have, 50 different directions they're going in, or they may not get the information that you want, or they might not even go and ask the coach for the interview. If you know, and you can reach out yourself and just find it and get it, that's what I would do. Rely on yourself for the research, for the information, for the contacts, as much as possible. Do your own homework. Get with your broadcast partner. I did that a lot especially when I was doing college sports. We would connect and say, what time can you talk to the coach from so-and-so? What time can you talk to coach so? Let's get on a call. Let's get on this together. And we'd ask very different questions, but it's good that you hear both. So I think that it's important to just don't rely on others. And that's not a shot at others. That's not taking a shot at others. It's just ultimately, what you need. And if you want something done, go get it yourself, because it's just, a lot of people have a lot of stuff going on, and it's easier to sometimes just reach out yourself. We do it all the time, even still at this level.
That's awesome.
Great advice.
Yeah. So Shawn, 2 questions for you, because Kyndra, you had said that, you were calling games on a little table with a tent on a track next to the soccer field. So, I mean, one of my most favorite memories is once called a game with a camera hooked up to a computer, and I was standing on the top of a van. So Shawn and Brody, after Shawn, what is the craziest place where you've called a game? And then after that, tell us where we can find you.
I don't know if I have anything like a van. I was lucky enough that Oregon had press boxes, and I've had press boxes generally, but I had a high school game where we were running it off of like a Verizon 4G thing with Skype going from the middle of like rural Oregon to go back to the Eugene station. And it was outside in the wind, in the cold, high school football. And that was tough. That was tough. But that's probably about it. Is just the freezing cold of Oregon winters, and not bringing gloves. Bring gloves. That's advice for.
I was gonna say, have you ever called a game at Washington women's and men's soccer stadium where you got to go up four flights of scaffolding And then in like the torrential downpour, because it never rains in Washington, is like the tarp was coming down and you're doing this with your hands on the tarp and the water's just shooting off the backside. You know the Pacific Midwest well, so you probably experienced that in Oregon yourself.
Yeah, that's basically the experience of that. Luckily, I mean, the closest was University of Washington football game when they opened the press box and it was snowing and raining sideways. But luckily, never had that with a soccer game there.
And Shawn, where can we find you?
Go to my website, ShawnMedow.com. Best way to get in touch.
Brody, craziest place you've ever done a game from, and where can we find you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's crazy, but it was embarrassing. I was doing a Princeton hockey game, and they put a table down below, and they had us sit on the table. So we had a chair on the table. And I didn't think that was a smart idea to begin with. And Princeton scored a goal. And as I said, goal, I fell back and I fell off the table. You never forget moments like that. You can find me at david@sportsbroadcastingcoach.com.
And one more, just for good measure. They put me right behind the two benches, and I said that it wasn't a foul. And a girl on the bench turns around and goes, she literally murdered him. She's bleeding, you idiot. And so that was, one of my favorite moments as well. Kyndra, before we let you go, where can we find you?
I'm at KyndraSports.com. So that's sort of my website. At Kyndra Sports is my Twitter handle. So Kyndra Sports is my Twitter handle. And that's where you can find me if you're not watching a Minnesota United broadcast.
Well, I can guarantee you that I'm looking forward to watching the Minnesota United broadcast this season.
And if you haven't been to Allianz, you better get to Allianz Field. I'm telling you, St. Paul, it's pretty special.
I'm wearing a jacket in LA.
I didn't say come in February.
August.
Did you guys watch the men's national team game? I was at that.
Yeah.
It's Honduras.
I was cold just watching that. I was under like 8 blankets just watching that because they look so cold. Yeah, well, thank you so much for all the incredible advice. We can't wait for the MLS season to start. And thank you all so much for joining us here at BS on Broadcasting. Until next time.